I think we'll be okay. The only thing we have to avoid is the microphone falling off the table because can't remember to send a stand. And I have so many of them, which is why it's so crazy. I have like a bucket of stands. And so it blows my mind. Right. I've made very few mistakes in this job, and here we go. There's always room for one.
Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. My name is Emma Irwin, your host for this series, and today we're talking about the state of content-related data management, and how brands need to be thinking about the technologies that surround content management, while of course touching on the retailer perspective of how content data is ingested and syndicated. I am so very pleased to have our guest introduce himself, and I am also so very glad that he didn't give up on this recording after I literally forgot to send him a stand for the microphone that doesn't really stand up on its own. Let's get right into meeting him.
Matt Leigh. I am responsible for our retail operations team here at Syndigo. So Vice President of Retail Operations, responsible for all of our ongoing program management and delivery for our retailers, as well as implementation. So everything from, them coming on board as a brand new retailer, new recipient of our content, to ensuring that suppliers on an ongoing basis are seeing success in delivering content to them.
Beautiful. I'm going to have you also tell the audience just a little bit about Syndigo, because it's like the majority of the audience is enterprise brands. And it's like, of course, you know what Syndigo is, but just in case someone wants an overview.
And maybe I have a different perspective than they do. So Syndigo is a content, I'm going to pretend I'm talking to my kids and explaining what Syndigo is. But Syndigo is a content services platform. We deliver all sorts of different types of content. Everything what we refer to as core content, which is your typical assets and images that you see on a PDP on a website, your feature benefit bullets, your product names, we all consider that core content. We also deliver enhanced content. So A+ content, rich media, what we call below the fold. Sometimes it could be above the fold. And one of the things that Syndigo differentiates in with enhanced content is above the fold enhanced content. But that's your 360 spins. It's your comparison charts, feature widgets, and things like that to help engage, more content, more availability of information, and tell the story about the brand, tell the story about the product. In addition to that, we're a GDSN data pool. So one of the largest in the world, and deliver GDSN content for food service, DIY and home improvement, and many other verticals across the space. And then offer a wide range of digital shelf analytics, as well as we call our enterprise data suite, which is our PIM and our product information management tool, PIM, as well as our master data management, so our MDM, which can support multiple domains as far as customer information, vendor information, etc.
Is there anything you don't do with all of that?
Oh, man. No.
Good answer.
We create content too.
Geez, incredible. I will have you next. This is one of our questions that we ask absolutely everybody. But what is the last thing that you purchased online?
It was this morning, actually. My daughters we built our house in 2019. It's starting to settle. And my daughter's door is starting to close on its own. That's not good. She's getting near that age where she's going to want her door closed all the time. So we have to make sure it stays open. And I bought one of those magnetic things that keeps the door tied to the wall.
Incredible.
What a great question. And what a weird purchase that I just made on Amazon. I do have an Amazon addiction too. So that's part of me fueling that addiction.
It's so easy to have.
Yes, it is.
They really make it a little bit too easy, but that's the whole point.
All right, we're going to start off this interview with the lay of the content land, followed by covering how wildly complex content requirements and syndication actually is. So I first asked Matt to tell me his hot takes on the importance of content in 2024. I think by now we all know that content is critical, but what else has changed?
It's important, I'll say that. And I'm hopefully everybody that listens to this podcast knows the importance of content. But we're starting to see a major shift within different verticals of the importance and kind of the digital maturity of each. Post-COVID, which I'm sure we'll talk about throughout this entire podcast, we're starting to see more maturity when it comes to CPG and grocery, retailers and suppliers, more of an investment on the consumer experience versus before it was all about quantity, getting every item that they had in store online. We're starting to see a shift on compliance. So we have some major legislation that has come out over the last number of years that now we're coming up on deadlines with FSMA and PFAS and all of these other things that just continue to come up that drive the need for both retailers and recipients to get that content as quickly and accurately as possible from the suppliers. And the suppliers have responsibility and requiredness to get that information to their retailers as well. So we're starting to see shifts both in the vertical space, based on the maturity. We're starting to see retailers and others obviously have the need for compliance information, but then also getting into like personalization and retail media. I mean, and then obviously AI, like AI needs the right inputs to be able to generate the right generative AI and, some of the other things that we're starting to see in the market. But I think from just an overall landscape, there's some, and we're starting to see more and more of the recipients, retailers starting to shift away from more of the quantity driven to more of the quality, but then not only just quality, but like, do I have the right data to drive the outcomes for our consumers? Do I have the right data to not necessarily slow me down to be able to expand my catalog, but get the right information that's going to drive a buying behavior? And that's where I think that balance, we're starting to see a major shift right now. And really retailers asking like, are we asking for the right things? Are we asking for too much? Are we asking for too less? And then just finding that right balance based on analysis and the analytics they're able to pull back and make adjustments very quickly and being agile when it comes to the information that they actually really need to collect to drive that consumer behavior.
Got it. I'm curious. I'm pulling like one very specific thing out that you just said, but this element of increased personalization, and you tied it specifically to retail media. Like, how does personalization tie into general like PDP content? Because I would assume that like you're usually aiming for PDP content to be pretty consistent across the board. And I know there are nuances, but like, what's that dynamic of personalization versus what a brand needs to, or a supplier needs to keep consistent across all of the retailers?
Yeah, and usually like we'll see like the dynamic change based on like product name or like, just being able to collect the right information to drive like SEO. If I have a history of purchasing doorstops for my daughter's room, I can guarantee you that there's information that, I'm reviewing on that page, the consistent information, and then that same information or the information that was available on that PDP is now going to start being available in some of these social media, platforms that I'm going to be looking at. Maybe it's the same image, maybe literally it's the same item or a competitor's item or whatever it may be. And so we're starting to see obviously the images, the importance of images and optimize images to drive click-through rates and things like that. But also just, when it comes to the category specific information, before we saw, to your point about PDPs being consistent, for the most part, yes, we'll see the consistency, but then you have situations like Amazon with like premium beauty. Now they're making a shift to where like, depending on the brand or even the behavior of the consumer, I'm going to see more premium beauty items populate in my views and my, recommended products versus maybe non-premium information or non-premium items. But in the premium items, now they're differentiating the content that could be collected and displayed for those specific items. And that's just something that we're starting to see more and more of, to really make sure that those products are in view of the consumers that they believe are going to make that purchasing decision.
Something I was thinking about, this brings me back to, at one point I did work on like the Flywheel retail team, and a lot of content management fell on my shoulders and like learning the syndication of all the things, et cetera. But as more and more retailers really kind of evolved their digital presence, I think what everyone came to know is that like every retailer has a slightly different criteria of what is required to actually show up on site. And so I'm curious, like, what kind of capabilities does Syndigo's interface have that help suppliers figure out like, okay, we want to protect our brand and be consistent across all of the different retailers, but at the same time, there are so many very specific nuances.
Absolutely. So we look at it as like a three-pronged approach, like people, technology, and process, or process, technology, and people. Ideally, we would have every single recipient asking for the exact same thing. That's never happened in the history of commerce. And so when it comes to people, when we're working with our recipients and retailers to get them onboarded into our network and we're building out their data model, we call them the requirement set, and we're looking at the attributes that they're collecting today, there's always a question of which of these attributes are common among other recipients, retailers in our network. And let's say that they're asking for a product name and they call it item name, like Amazon does. They call it item name. And we have, let's say they have certain character limits and validations, that they require. If there is a attribute that we have that's consistent across 5, 10, 15, 20 other recipients that is closely tied to that same business rule or validation, we will automatically map that or alias that for that retailer. We will also talk to them about if they're far off in requesting a specific attribute that is not consistent with anything that we've seen. We will let them know that. And we'll say, hey, we have something closely related. Is this something that you're willing to make adjustments for on your side in order to take advantage of the fact that when a Procter & Gamble or Kraft Heinz or a Black & Decker or whoever it may be are filling out their content, they're not having to start from scratch. They're able to, and that content can cascade down into those specific attributes that we're able to map and alias for them in order for that content to then be able to be delivered and, automatically filled out for that specific recipient. If there's not a way that we can do that. So like we call them private attributes, like obviously pricing information, vendor number, product ID for that specific retailer. Those are the things that we're not going to be able to map or alias. Suppliers have the ability to create their own rules, their own transformations. So getting back to the technology side, they're able to have, those rules and validations on their side to transform their content to meet the needs of the retailers. Obviously, our goal is to lessen the amount of transformations they need to create because, again, that's just more and more business rules that they have to build out and maintain. But it happens, every single retailer, because of either competitive differentiation in the market, because of the fact that they don't have the capabilities or the analytics or the analysis or the people internally that have been able to analyze and figure out truly what is needed and how do I conform to an industry standard. There's a lot of that just is kind of old school, like we're going to keep it the way we are. And then obviously those are the ones that we hear most about from our suppliers and manufacturers that are disgruntled about sending content to that retailer. So there's that balance. And a lot of the times we're consulting them, giving them the information to make the decision. But at the end of the day, we will make sure that the retailer is getting the content that they need in the way that they need it, whether or not it's things that we can control on our side that are in our direct control, either by the retailer making an adjustment on their side, willing to conform to more of an industry standard, or we're able to actually map those attributes together, or the supplier creates a rule on their side to transform that. So again, processes around transformations that we can make, or the supplier based on our technology, or having that, the people aspect and having those conversations and providing that feedback and seeing if the retailer is willing to make adjustments. And we've had dozens upon dozens of retailers come and say, hey, we're collecting Prop 65 this way. We've been collecting it for years. And we continue to hear from our suppliers that, hey, why can't you just collect it this way? Why can't you collect it from Syndigo? And amongst other attributes that we're able to support there. And they will make adjustments in their data model in order to allow an easier way for suppliers to provide that information.
That's actually really cool. I didn't know that. And I listening to that, I'm like, oh, really? You get the retailers to budge? That's awesome. But they also it showcases just a trust in Syndigo and what Syndigo is doing. I'm taking things a step backwards and talking a little bit about retailer to retailer. Why isn't there just this streamlining of what the attributes are? And I know you mentioned competitive differentiation, but something I've been thinking about forever is what is competitive about making all of your attributes completely different from a different retailers? And I don't know if the best answer is everyone has the same attributes that need to be filled out, but how did we get to a point of such differentiation across those attributes beyond just old ways of working? We've collected the things like this forever. It's come on, guys.
I mean, really, it's a lot of it is just the immaturity of the technology and the processes that they have internally. A lot of it's just antiquated, that they have a robust taxonomy that's not been cleaned up for years, and they just keep adding and adding and adding to that existing taxonomy without any due diligence of saying, hey, let's look at the data and determine whether or not this is content that's actually being used. So it's part of that. It's part of the fact that many of them are not talking to one another. And so really where Syndigo differentiates is that we are they will come and they will ask hey, can you look at our data model and tell us whether or not this makes sense, whether or not provide a benchmark against our competitors. Are we way far off? Are we too little? They're not necessarily we're not getting a lot of feedback from these recipients that they're just steadfast, we're not willing to change. It's not that. It's they don't have the means to change. They don't know where to even begin. And so partners like Flywheel and others can help them, as in addition to conversations from Syndigo, can absolutely help them move in that right direction. And I think that that's something that we're going to start seeing a major shift over the next year or two in order for them to scale more. So yes, they want their own sometimes, and that's typically because of like their taxonomy is proprietary and it's driving specific left-hand side navigation and search filtration on their website, and their website's built around that. So like if I'm going and clicking on, a filter on my left-hand side on the website, it's going to be based on a lot of those choice values that they have in the taxonomy. Those choice values may not exactly line up with the industry standard. And so that's where like, even though they want to make sure that they still have that same process for a consumer, that same ease of use to get down into the specific items they're looking for, they are asking for feedback to say like, hey, are these the right choices? Are these the things that are being requested by others that are available by the suppliers? And so I think honestly, like at the end of the day, the common denominator is a lack of communication, like a lack of awareness and communication. And that's what a lot of them are just requesting. And then we're having those conversations. But to your point, it's easier said than done. And so it's going to take quite a bit of time and effort for many of these retailers to make adjustments. And I think another part of this is they are, the personalization, back to the personalization, and then they're just their brand. They want when it comes to differentiation on the website, they, even though everybody asks for feature benefit bullets and, specifications and things like that, the way that they are describing those things, like maybe within a feature benefit bullet, we have some retailers that are just say, hey, brand manufacturer, you fill out whatever you want for feature 1 through feature 5 and any other features you want to fill out up to 10. Where other recipients are stating, hey, for this specific category and feature 1, we want you to fill out this specific information about this item in this category. And it's more of a different experience online or across the omni channel when it comes to if I'm buying on this retailer versus another, and that's how they want to differentiate. But they're asking for similar and the same information, just maybe in different areas of the attributes in the data model that they're collecting.
Something Matt mentioned earlier on in the interview that I wanted to touch on more was compliance and the increased requirements for suppliers to maintain compliant on-site content. He had mentioned some US legal acronyms on compliance, so I asked him to break this down more for us and tell us if suppliers are struggling with these changes.
They are. A lot of it's around communication and education. Like, hey, we just saw one retailer this morning actually sent out a survey, or maybe it was during this week, but sent out a survey to their suppliers asking whether they're ready for FSMA. For FSMA, it's a lot around like sustainability and traceability and things like that. For PFAS, it's all around you cannot sell certain items that have the non-stick in your pans. You cannot sell that in certain states now, and that's going to probably continue to grow. And so retailers need this information in order to make sure items are not being sold in certain states, or that they are collecting information, the relevant information for the government as well as consumers to be aware of when it comes to traceability and sustainability and things like that. And so I think that it's making sure that suppliers know it's coming well in advance, that they have a plan in place, or if they don't have a plan, they are guided or provided materials to go build a plan, whether that's using a partner like you guys or other partners out there, or even just, figuring out themselves, but making sure they're educating more people internally within their own companies. It's a lot around that. And so I think just making sure that they have a heads up well in advance. They have guidance. They have partners like Syndigo that recommend certain data structures. So if like it happened with Prop 65, like we came up with our own standard of collecting this information, had alignment from some major big box retailers, and then kind of everybody else that was maybe more mid-market, more regional retailers kind of bought into that and said, okay, yes, this makes sense. We've met with our legal teams. This meets our legal requirement. Let's go and collect it this way. So now we probably only have 1 or 2 different Prop 65 attributes across the entire data model. We want to take that same concept of any other compliance attributes that are out there, which you have your standard ones like batteries and materials and things like that are always being collected, restrictions, all of that. But with some of these new legislations that more legislation coming around in the markets, that's where it's just so important that we are driving consistencies. Because to your point, the last question around the differences and why do retailers do this, like what is going on? It's because there's no communication. There's no standards that they're adhering to, and they're available. They're available through content service providers. They're available through GS1 and others. And we just have to communicate. We have to talk and make sure everybody is on the same page. And that's very difficult, very difficult. And again, back to easier said than done.
My last kind of question for you is that like I do a ton of just experimental looking at different retailers. And of course, like I shop from the same general 3 kind of large places, but I'm always curious to be looking at other regional kind of mostly looking at grocers and all of those comparisons. But there are so many different retailers that like it's 2024 and it still feels like so much of the content that is required from these retailers is like the absolute bare minimum. It's like 2 images, 3 bullets, and it's just like, okay, but everyone else has so much more. So I'm curious from your perspective, is that just purely digital lagging and innovation lagging? Or is there some kind of strategic element to that where they're like, hey, maybe we'll get more people to list products and more suppliers to get our products on site because there's less requirements. Curious your take there.
That's a great question.
Shower thought that I had. Yeah.
Anybody listening right now, I bet you immediately are saying, oh, it's the former. They're lagging. The technological maturity is not there. It is mostly that, but it's also the latter as well, like the former. When it comes to like pre-COVID, nobody was really buying groceries online. And again, like I'm preaching to the choir here, but nobody was buying groceries online. After COVID, they were. And so a lot of the grocers immediately realized, okay, we don't have all of our items. We may not even have a shoppable site. And so they invested in Instacart, WinShop, and Fresh Shop, and other e-com platforms and invested heavily. And it was all about quantity at that point. How do we get as many of our in-store items online in order for them to be purchasable and pick up or delivered or whatever it may be? And so at that point, it's like, let's just get a product name and a few things out there. And if we have an image, great, let's get the image on there. But then let's go and focus on getting images and the content that we need in order to build out those PDPs. So for multiple years during COVID as well as post-COVID, it was all around let's get a single image online because of just the way that their PDPs are structured and the storage that they had available internally, or maybe not even having a digital asset management tool in place. And let's get the bare minimum online so the items are purchasable. And then there was questions like, does anybody really care about multiple images when it comes to a produce item or a milk jug? And so like there was those questions coming up at the time. Well, that has since been answered, and absolutely consumers want multiple images, lifestyle images, maybe not for very basic commodity type items, but most of the items in a grocery store, absolutely, the data shows that is impactful when you have a full carousel. So a lot of these retailers are starting to invest in technology in order to catch up with other verticals that have been there for years. And so grocery, for example, building out different e-com platforms, building out, their own product information management tools in order to store this information. And then not only collecting just a bare minimum now, but now also building out a carousel, building out a full image carousel, building out multiple different description-based attributes in order to drive SEO on their own website, as well as left-hand side navigation and things like that. But then taking another step further to say, hey, how do these consumers shop? Well, we've identified that they're shopping based on their diet or their allergen restrictions or anything like that. So let's make sure we're capturing that information and using tools like Syndigo to get that information and store it and then be able to drive a better consumer experience online. So initially it was just get the bare minimum out there, quantity driven. Now it's about quality and a shopping experience. And we're going to continue to see that grow and grow over the next few years. Obviously, there's retailers that are far ahead of others, but we're still in this kind of middle space when it comes to grocery, that there's several very, very large grocers out there that can only support one image on a website. And now we're having conversations with them about supporting more and more additional attributes that they can allow on the pages in order, again, to drive the better experience of, shopping on that website. That's the one side. The other side is we have retailers and other verticals that have been there for years. And they've been collecting it all. And they're questioning whether or not they're collecting too much. And so they're analyzing and they were, working with, service partners and identifying whether or not they're collecting too much information, the right information. What is that balance of information that's going to drive consumers? So they don't get stuck in this data management grind where it's taking suppliers 20 days, 25 days, 30 days from getting that information to that retailer launching that item online. So if it's taking 30 days for an item to be set up, they're losing to their competitors, especially a competitor that can get something up in 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks. And so the more information they collect and require, the longer that's going to typically take for a supplier to provide that information, especially if it's, a long tail supplier that may not have the capability or the means or the resources available to provide that information. And so it's stopping them from investing in other areas, like going to a endless aisle scenario or building out a marketplace. So some of them are actually, you've seen Target, you've seen Walmart, obviously Amazon's one of the, the first, but everybody's going to this marketplace model, especially the big boxes. And we have still several out there that aren't able to add that model yet because they're stuck in that data management grind because they're just requesting too many things and items are taking too long to get set up. So there's that piece. And then lastly, there are some retailers that we see in certain verticals and industries where it makes sense for them to ask for the bare minimum in order to get an item online, especially if maybe it's dropship. So they're going to that, endless aisle scenario, get as many products online. They have millions of products. Not every single product on their website has 5 images, and so and it's dependent on the category as well. We're seeing some of these retailers that will request a bare minimum, get that item online, and then watch and see and look at the data to see if this item is becoming more purchasable, if it's growing in sales. And then at that point, they're requesting that information to really build out the PDP. You would think that that's kind of backwards, but we're actually seeing the opposite, where some of these retailers are saying, you know what, let's get as many online, and then let's look at the traffic, the sales data that says, hey, should we actually invest our resources and request from suppliers more information here in order to scale that item even further? Because they're going still more quantity than quality at that time, at least when it comes to more of an endless aisle dropship scenario. For the in-store items and, the items that they are stocking, that they're delivering themselves, typically there's more of an investment in getting that information.
Incredible answer. I'm thinking about back to how digital has changed our expectations of what we expect something to look like online. And to your point of a general commodity item, do I need multiple pictures of the same stick of butter that I buy over and over again? Not really, but also at the same time, I expect there to be multiple pictures, or at least one of the cow in a field or something, but just that kind of expectation that consumers now have because they got used to the luxury of all these additional pictures and information. And then you come across a retailer where there's just one picture and I'm like, is it real butter?
Yep. What's the fact panel look like? I want to see what the fact panel, want to make sure
going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Okay. I think that per the time is going to kind of wrap us up, but I'm curious if you any closing thoughts you have, anything you need to spew out to the audience here in terms of things you're seeing and you want people to walk away with.
I think, these are exciting times. They're stressful times. I mean, e-com is changing on a daily basis. We have some retailers that are literally making data model requirements that changes to their taxonomy and other areas of their business on a daily basis. We have others that are weekly, biweekly, monthly. If you are trying to stay competitive in the market, whether you are a smaller retailer or the size of a Kraft Heinz or a Procter & Gamble, it is important that you have a plan and that you have the resources, the knowledge internally in order to scale, because this is not going to go away. It's not going to change. It's going to become even more personalized. Now, AI is going to help out quite a bit. That may take some time though before it can get caught up, especially for some of those smaller suppliers. And so I would heavily invest in making sure that you've taken a strong look internally to see if you have your processes, people, and technology set up to scale in this environment that we're in today. Because if not, you're going to get left behind.
All right, very last question for you is something that lives on your digital wish list, which means that it's not a door stopper that you actually converted on, but something in a cart that just lives on whatever device you most likely shop from, but something you won't actually purchase, and why?
Oh gosh. You know what? Probably this awesome microphone that you sent for me to use. This is something that I would love to have, but I don't think I'd ever purchase it. This is really cool.
That's fair. Yeah, you don't really, especially one that looks like this, it's you don't really acquire these unless your job is sitting and talking into the microphone and having
Emma, you should get one that's bedazzled, on
you
these
think?
podcasts.
Yeah.
Just get it all bedazzled or get a gold one. You deserve it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another episode of the Commerce Collective podcast. Thank you so much to Matt and the Syndigo team for this awesome podcast content about content. And hopefully you've walked away with a new perspective and some new insights to share back with your team on the content landscape. I've been your host, Emma Irwin, and we will see you next time.